Hey everyone, welcome to today's Explainer. We are about to decode a massive, game-changing realization: why traditional financial math, all those complex spreadsheets and rigid formulas, why they so often just completely fail us in the real world. Now, if you have not watched the previous video, please watch it first. The link is available in the description or in the I button. But if you're ready to fundamentally shift how you think about building wealth, let's get right into it.
Okay, let's dive right into this. Picture these two incredibly different lives. On one hand, you've got Ronald Reed. He was a humble, rural janitor and gas station attendant from Vermont who literally hitchhikes to high school. But when he died, he shocked absolutely everyone by leaving behind an $8 million net worth. Crazy, right? Then, on the other hand, you have Richard Fuscone, a Harvard-educated, heavily credentialed finance executive at Merrill Lynch who was so successful he retired in his 40s. Yet, after the 2008 financial crisis hit, Fuscone went completely bankrupt. His massive mansion sold off in foreclosure. So how in the world does a janitor massively outperform a top-tier finance executive? Well, it proves one big thing: finance is not a hard science. It really all comes down to this core thesis from our source material. Financial success is not a hard science. It's a soft skill, where how you behave is more important than what you know. Seriously, you could be a certified genius, but if you lose control of your emotions or just let greed take over the wheel, you're going to face financial disaster. The psychology of money is all about mastering these totally underappreciated behavioral skills. So, here is our roadmap for today. We're going to cover subjective reality, luck, risk, and survival, the power of tails, and finally, ego and context. All right, let's jump straight into pillar number 1.
Part 1, subjective reality, and why, honestly, no one is actually crazy.
Check out this wild fact. Your personal experiences with money make up maybe, 0.0000001% of what has actually happened in the world, right? But they dictate about 80% of how you think the world works. Take the stock market, for instance. If you were born in 1970, the S&P 500 increased almost tenfold during your teens and 20s. You'd think the market is a money machine. But if you were born in 1950, well, the market went literally nowhere during that same period of your life. That's two groups, separated purely by chance, growing up with completely wildly different worldviews.
And we see the exact same phenomenon with inflation. If you were born in the 1960s, you watched prices triple during your early adult life. Because of that, you probably have this really deep-seated fear of inflation. You lived through the gas lines. You saw your paychecks shrinking in real time. But if you were born in 1990, inflation has been so incredibly low for your entire life that you simply cannot fathom that level of emotional fear. It's just not in your bones. The reality is, we all base our financial choices on these deeply subjective, personal experiences.
Moving on to pillar 2, luck, risk, and survival. We so often forget that luck and risk are essentially siblings. Not every success is purely due to hard work, and not every failure is just a bad decision. So if we can't just rely on brains, or grinding it out, or perfectly timed luck, what truly drives long-term financial success? Like, what is the actual secret ingredient that separates the fleetingly rich from the permanently wealthy? Well, the answer is a survival mentality. Let's think about a classic scenario with 3 investors during a recession: Sue, Jim, and Tom. The market crashes. Tom absolutely panics and sells everything, totally wiping out. Jim? He just stops investing entirely out of pure fear. But Sue just maintains her steady investments. She survives the volatility without flinching. Mere survival is literally the ultimate secret weapon here, because it buys you the one thing you desperately need: longevity. And you need longevity for compounding to actually work its magic. Which brings us to pillar 3. Diving into chapter 6 of our source material, the power of tails. Tails, you win.
This chapter is all about this highly counterintuitive math that says you can actually be wrong half the time and still make an absolute fortune. Let me hit you with a stunning number: 40%. When we look at large public companies, specifically the established Russell 3000 index since 1980, 40% of those companies lost at least 70% of their value and never recovered. Never. It's a lot like venture capital, right? Where you fully expect the vast majority of startups to totally fail, but you're banking on a tiny fraction to return 50 times your money. The broader public market works the same way. It's driven by a tiny handful of massive winners that offset huge numbers of catastrophic duds.
Now, what's really interesting about this is how completely widespread this failure is. Catastrophic loss spares absolutely no industry. When we break it down across sectors, it's not just the risky tech or telecom companies facing over 50% catastrophic loss rates. No way. Even in supposedly safe, boring sectors like utilities, more than 1 in 10 companies experience this kind of wipeout. Failure is incredibly common, and honestly, just accepting that fact completely changes how we should view success.
The greatest wealth builders understand this deeply. They are absolute masters of the tail event. Take Heinz Berggruen. He amassed one of the greatest art collections in human history. How? By buying massive quantities of art. Like 99% of it was of little to no value, but that 1%, they were Picasso's, and they made him a legend. Or Walt Disney. He produced over 400 cartoons that lost a literal fortune, but the 83 minutes of Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs, that one mega hit paid off all his debts and built his entire studio. Even Warren Buffett has owned something like 400 to 500 stocks during his life, but he made most of his monumental wealth on just about 10 of them.
We see this directly in modern mega companies too. Amazon is the perfect example. Remember the Fire Phone? They launched it, and it was a spectacular, very public failure. But Jeff Bezos famously pointed out that this kind of thing is completely normal. He basically said, hey, if you thought that was a big failure, we are actively working on much bigger ones right now. They can absolutely afford to lose money on duds like the Fire Phone, because those losses are so easily offset by massive tail event successes like Amazon Web Services, which pulls in tens of billions of dollars. Tails to the rescue, right?
Netflix operates on this exact same logic. When they canceled several big-budget shows a while back, their CEO, Reed Hastings, came out and said something brilliant. He said, "Our hit ratio is way too high right now. We have to take more risk. We should have a higher cancel rate overall." It's exactly how comedian Chris Rock builds a comedy special. Rock tests dozens of terrible jokes in tiny little clubs where he bombs constantly. He completely accepts those failures in order to find the 1% of jokes that become massive hits for his HBO specials. Basically, if you aren't failing enough, you aren't taking enough risks to actually discover those rare tail events.
So this really requires a total reframing of what it means to be a financial genius. As Napoleon famously said, a genius is the man who can do the average thing when everyone else around him is losing his mind. It's not about being some savant who predicts the future with complex algorithms. Not at all. It's about having the emotional fortitude to weather the duds, pay the so-called admission fee of volatility, and just maintain steady behavior when the market inevitably panics.
And this whole concept of tails extends far beyond just companies. It applies to global history itself. Think about it. The entire trajectory of our modern economy has been driven by a tiny handful of completely unpredictable outlier events. The Great Depression, World War II, the Manhattan Project, September 11th. Billions of micro-events happen every single day, sure, but it's these massive, unpredictable tails that compound to shape absolutely everything about the world we live in today.
Which leads us to a pretty critical realization, and honestly, a question I really want you to ask yourself. If we all have entirely different subjective realities, and the world is largely driven by chaotic, unpredictable tail events, why do we always assume everyone around us is playing by the exact same financial rules that we are?
That brings us to our final pillar, ego and context. Playing your own game.
Listen. One of the absolutely most dangerous things you can do with your money is take cues from people who are playing a completely different game than you. And a huge part of this vulnerability is driven by our own egos. It's perfectly captured in what the author calls the man in the car paradox. He noticed this back when he worked as a valet. When someone drives up in a flashy Ferrari, onlookers don't actually care about the driver at all. They just imagine themselves driving the Ferrari. The paradox here is that people buy wealth signaling items because they want respect and admiration. But the onlookers just use those items as a benchmark for their own desire for respect. The hard truth? Nobody is as impressed with your stuff as you are.
So the crucial point here is that letting your ego drive you to copy others usually leads to absolute disaster, especially when we're talking about investing. Just think back to the dot-com bubble. Bubbles basically form when long-term investors blindly copy the momentum of short-term day traders. A day trader buying a ridiculously overvalued tech stock back in 1999 actually made sense for their specific game. They just needed the price to go up by the end of the day. But when long-term investors, the people holding money for a retirement 20 years away, saw that momentum and blindly copied it, they got completely destroyed. It was two groups playing entirely different games, colliding on the exact same field.
So, to bring this all together for you, finance is not a hard science. It is a soft skill, and it is driven heavily by your personal behavior. Mastering money isn't about memorizing complex formulas or building the perfect spreadsheet. It's about understanding your own unique biases, surviving the inevitable failures, respecting the massive, undeniable power of tail events, and most importantly, defining the specific game you are actually trying to win. So I want to leave you with this final thought to reflect on today. Are you consciously playing your own financial game? Or are you secretly, maybe driven by ego or just going with the momentum, trying to win someone else's? Take a really hard look at your behavior. Stay tuned for the next video.